And so finally, I'm glad to introduce to you Tomas Vytautas Raskevic ius from Lithuania.
Can you put the slides on? That's perfect. So dear friends, it's my honor to speak in front of you today on behalf of the Lithuanian Gay League, which is the sole NGO in the country representing the interests of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual citizens of the Republic of Lithuania. And today, as my country is going to take up the European Union presidency in less than 2-week period, I would like to shortly speak about how the upcoming Lithuanian EU presidency is going to impact the LGBT rights in general and the rights of LGBT youth in particular. The next one slide. And I would like to structure my short contribution in the following way. First of all, I will brief you shortly on what situation the LGBT youth is facing in my country. And secondly, I would then move on to speaking more broadly about how the upcoming Lithuanian EU presidency and what kind of implications it's going to impact of LGBT community, both on local and European levels. Next one. So now let's move on to this first section of my presentation, which is on LGBT youth in Lithuania, and I will brief you shortly about the legal developments in the country, also the sexual education policy and anti-bullying strategies. Next one. Oh, thank you. So provide you with a short general overview. There is no comprehensive approach towards social inclusion of LGBT youth, and this category simply does not exist in the Lithuanian discourse. The current status of the law implies that information on LGBT issues is technically considered as detrimental to the minors, and in essence it means that civil society organizations are barred from interviewing and addressing the state inactivity. There is also no officially adopted sexual education program compulsory for all public schools. And finally, there is no official data on how many LGBT pupils are bullied, harassed, and experience discrimination at schools on grounds of their sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. So addressing the current status of the law, and the next slide, please. We have this quite nasty law on protection of minors against the detrimental effects of public information, which was adopted in 2010. And this law does not classify information on homosexuality per se as detrimental to the minors, but it prohibits information which promotes sexual relations. And secondly, it prohibits information which expresses contempt for family values, encourages the concept of entry into marriage and creation of family other than stipulated in the Constitution of the Republic and the Civil Code. And of course, it goes without saying that there is no legal recognition of same-sex relationships in the Lithuanian legal system, therefore barring any information on LGBT issues as possibly qualifying under this provision. However, it has to be noted that the scope of the law itself is quite limited. So basically the law states that the information has to be directly directed towards the minors. So put it in other words, it does not apply to the public information on websites, mass media or other stuff. But basically if you have an idea to publish some leaflets and distribute it in the schools, well, it does not work that way. And the other interesting thing is the law is already in place like for 3 years. And the provision was never substantially applied. And we are fully aware of the fact that we need to test the law and actually to get it applied in our case. And I would really love to see the national courts on elaborating on what's the contempt of family values in that country. And speaking about very practical effects of the law, the civil society organizations are de jure barred from engaging with LGBT youth up to 18 years old. And what is most importantly, and probably most sadly, is that young LGBT people do not have access to the appropriate information, support, and necessary protection to enable them to live to their sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. Speaking about the sexual orientation in the country, there is no official teaching program on sexual education, and it was never developed by the Ministry of Education. So to put it in other words, it's not clear what is the content of sexual education classes provided in schools, if any, despite the fact that Ministry declares that yes, some kind of sexual education is going on. we made some interesting social statistics about the views and values of teachers and administration staff in schools who are obviously providing this kind of sexual education. And basically 80% do not agree that same-sex relationships can be viewed as an alternative to the traditional family. And almost 90% agree that family is based exclusively on the marriage between a man and a woman. So based on these kind of observations, it can be safely concluded that LGBT issues are either absent or presented in a negative way within the curricula and education material at schools. And speaking about the anti-bullying strategy, I also have a lot of no's here. So there is no measures adopted for the protection of LGBT pupils, no official data on how many LGBT pupils are bullied, harassed, and experience discrimination, and no equality and safety policies, codes or conduct or training programs are issued for the staff in the schools. And surprise, surprise, according to the statistical data of the World Health Organization, Lithuania has the second worst suicide rate among young people between 15 and 19 years old in the world, and it's basically 24 deaths among 10,000 people per year. So based on the fact that we have a population of 3 million, you can just calculate it yourselves. And the public authorities simply do not see the connection between the suicide rates and the no access to the information in relation to the LGBT issues, and they rather seek to protect LGBT youth from homosexual propaganda than foster social inclusion and open dialogue. And the next slide, please. And now I'd like to move to the issue of the upcoming EU presidency as a platform for promoting LGBT rights. On 27th of July 2013, we have a very special event in the history of the country. It's going to be the second Baltic Pride March for Equality in the history of the country. And of course, the date was very strategically selected due to two following reasons. The first one is the Lithuanian EU presidency, which starts on July the 1st. And the second one is that this year we mark very special anniversary of 20th anniversary of decriminalization of homosexuality or so-called sodomy in Lithuania, which happened on July the 4th in 1993. And we have a legal controversy going on with regards to the location of a Baltic Pride March for Equality. And we asked the permission, and the municipal authorities granted the permission already in January this year. But they unilaterally relocated the Baltic Pride March for Equality from the Central Avenue in the downtown of Vilnius to the rather isolated area on the river bank. And due to the fact that this kind of a decision was arrived following quite serious breaches of the constitution and the law on public meetings, we appealed against this decision before the national courts. And surprisingly, which was a very positive thing, on 11th April 2013, we won the case. However, Vilnius municipality appealed against the decision, and now we're awaiting the final judgment by the Supreme Administrative Court, and the hearing is scheduled next week on the 18th of June, and we are hoping the decision, at least to have a decision in the beginning of July. And the interesting development which is happening with the public authorities, that now we have started disseminating this message, but of course it's only locally. And they are saying that the local LGBT community is intentionally seeking to harm the country's image in the course of the coming presidency, trying to indicate that the country is more homophobic than it actually is. But, and the next slide, please. But I would like to say that it's institutionalized homophobia and not the legitimate claims of the local LGBT community which are harming the country's image. And the next slide, please. But of course, the presidency is a great opportunity not only for the policymakers, but also for us. And there are some very positive impacts in relation to the presidency happening as well. So for example, it was very recently, but it still happened. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has granted an official status of the EU Presidency Associate event for our International LGBT Human Rights Conference, which is going to take place on 26th of July 2013 in the framework of the Baltic Pride events. So I'm very hopeful that we'll have some kind of very nice event and similar to the one we are having now. The second very positive development is that the public authorities have finally realized that it won't be possible to sweep the LGBT issue under the carpet, and it's becoming their well-deserved headache. And also, a very interesting thing happened with the Ministry of Social Affairs, which proposed to establish a working group on the LGBT issues. So it's also unprecedented development, and we are hoping that it's not only in the relation to the LGBT issues, but probably that somebody has finally arrived to their senses. And my final slide is about the broader applications of the Lithuanian presidency to the trio presidency agenda. And of course, we have to be very realistic that Lithuania is very different from Ireland. And my insight would be that the European LGBT agenda is likely to be postponed in the course of the Lithuanian new presidency. And as examples of that is that Lithuania does not support the EU roadmap for LGBT equality, so it's not among the supporting governments. And the new anti-discrimination directive is not listed among the social priorities, despite the Ministry of Social Affairs at some instances in front of an international audience referring to it. It also has to be concluded that despite the fact that the EU presidency provides unique opportunities in promoting LGBT rights at home, so basically in Lithuania, the LGBT-related controversies might become the defining characteristic of the period, and I would be really ashamed to see that this very unique opportunity of my small little country is defined and recognized because of some homophobic and transphobic developments. And finally, and probably most sadly, some politicians are abusing the publicity which is surrounding the presidency in order to manifest that certain European values are not going to be accepted in Lithuania. And I'm referring to certain homophobic and transphobic legislative initiatives which we got in May. But in order not to be overtly negative, I'm not going to be explicit on this. So thank you very much for your attention, and I open the floor for your further questions.
Well, I'm informed by the organisers that, given that we're running late, we're not going to have time for questions and answers right now. However, the presenters will be around for the rest of the day. There will be further plenaries and there will be opportunities. So keep the thoughts in your heads and the questions in your heads, because there's so much there to pursue. Just to conclude, I would like to say that I started by making a statement of how far we have come, specifically in the Irish context. We've just had 4 very telling and powerful statements of how far there is still to go. And yet, still on a positive note, the 4 speakers themselves would give great hope that in facing the challenges ahead in pursuing the equality agenda for LGBT young people, we're in very good hands. Thank you, George and Andy and Amy and Thomas.